Hi, Zandy. If you're a longtime listener of the People and Projects podcast, you may recall that every once in a while we have a type of episode that we call In the Trenches. It's an episode that interviews someone who is actively working in a project leadership role, allowing us to benefit from the lessons that they've been learning over the years. I'm glad to welcome our guest today, Yasmina Khelifi from Paris, France. Yasmina has been a leader in the telecom industry for many years and is an active blogger on projectmanagement.com and elsewhere. She has extensive experience working with international teams, providing her unique insights into how culture factors into leading and communicating. And while I'm still working at mastering English, Yasmina can interact with teammates in French, German, Spanish, Japanese, Italian, English, and she's learning Arabic. Well, this is a discussion I've been looking forward to sharing with you. So let's get into it. Yasmina, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Andy, I'm delighted to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you've been in the global telecom world for many years. How would you describe your current role and what you're responsible for?
Yes, you're right, Andy. I have been working in telecom for 20 years now, and currently I manage projects deliveries for SIM cards in Middle East and African countries. It means 15 countries. Most of them are French-speaking countries, and there are some English-speaking countries.
Ah, nice. Well, we find that people often don't decide at a young age to be a project manager. Like most people don't say to their mother at a young age, Mama, someday I want to be a project manager. But I seem to recall, if I remember right, you started as a telecom engineer. So what was your path to get to this current role?
Well, Andy, you make me feel old, in fact, after 20 years. So how can I summarize 20 years? 4 steps, I would say, for you and to your audience. In fact, first, I began as a telecom engineer, which means I began by testing services, platforms at a R&D center. And innovative services at that time, it was download of ringtones, of wallpapers into mobile. So very innovative, but nowadays it's very common. And one day, a line manager came to see me. It was 6 years after I graduated, I began to work, and he told me, Mark is going to leave his position as a project manager, and I think you will be a good fit for it. I was surprised, because I didn't really think of career path. I didn't have specific guidance. And also I didn't ask anything, And I said, okay, let's think about it. Thank you. So then I reached out to Mark and asked how it is to be a project manager. And Mark said, very boring, very administrative. I do not recommend you this position. I lacked self-confidence. So I was about to refuse. And I remembered I worked with a very nice woman project manager. So I reached out to her and said, Laetitia, how it is to be a project manager? And she said, great. You are going to meet many people. You are going to have many activities. I really recommend you this position. So 2 different voices. Yes. Lack of self-confidence, what to do. And then I opened up to a dear colleague in the team. He was also a close friend. And I told him, I don't know what to do. Shall I refuse? Shall I accept? And he said, if it was so boring, why Mark did this job for 3 years? And he opened my eyes and I said, yes, let's do it. So I accepted. I never regretted it. So, it was first thing, sponsorship by a line manager and a bit of courage. Yes. Then after 2 or 3 years, I moved to a more operational position. Why? Because I applied to be a line manager of the team where I was a project manager, and I was refused. Why? Because we told me, you are a member of the team. It's not recommended to be a manager of the team where you work in. I got this answer, but years later, I have seen many people are part of a team and became manager of the same team. So application, it was more operational. So that's why I decided to go to this position. It was a larger footprint. because the first position, by the way, project manager, it was software project manager. Now it was application project manager. It means managing the integration of applications, services into mobile devices. So I worked inside a bigger program managed by a British colleagues, technical project program manager. And I managed the application. So the application providers, they were based in UK, in France, in Romania, in Ireland also. And I worked with European countries because the devices were launched in European countries. And at that time, it was probably 5 countries. It was all virtual. By the way, I never really met people. So this one was quite long, 6-7 years. I worked with very famous manufacturers, so a lot of visibility. It was fun also because I always got the mobiles before everyone because we had the mobile to test and very high-end devices, etc. And then, one day also, I think there was an internal reorganization. And I was proposed to manage the launch of devices in Middle East and Africa. And, Andy, at the beginning, I was not really happy because I was thriving with the different famous manufacturers in Europe, many devices, etc., big visibility. So it was very good for the ego, if I want to say it honestly. And then I said, Middle East and Africa, there were not so many devices at that time. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to learn. But I said, yes, let's try it anyway. And once more, I never regretted it because I could learn a lot. And thanks to this experience, the last step is moving to a different technological field, SIM cards, in Middle East and Africa. So, first step, it was telecom engineer first, then software project manager, application manager, launch of mobile in Middle East and Africa, and launch of SIM cards in Middle East and Africa. Yes, it's more 5, by the way. Some takeaways also to say that, as you have seen here, I was helped by sponsorship, refusal of being a manager, of a proposal being manager. Then I had also reorganization, internal reorganization. So I think the takeaways are always look beyond your position, your tasks, your activities, your title, to be prepared for the next step. Also, build a squad of trusted friends, colleagues. You can reach out when you need advice and when you need well-intentioned, and when you can get well-intentioned feedback, and be open to opportunities, whether you're chosen or not.
Such good advice. I think sometimes people just say, well, I'm afraid, I'm comfortable with where I'm at, and they're afraid to take that. So I appreciate also the emphasis on courage. It took courage because it was not a guarantee that would be successful. So that's very good examples. Now, because of your experience, you've done a lot of virtual work, and that was before we've all been doing virtual work for the last couple of years, or mostly. So what are some common mistakes that people make when trying to lead projects virtually? And what can we do to be more effective when we are working with virtual teams?
Yes, you are correct. You are right. I have managed projects virtually for a very long time, since the beginning. I worked in 2 different virtual settings, if I want to be precise. At the beginning, most of the time, I had also co-located teams and some remote colleagues. And after, when I moved to application manager, it was all remote with British colleagues, application manager, European countries, manufacturers in China, in Korea, etc. And with virtual work for me, most of the time, I didn't really meet all the stakeholders. Most of the time it was by phone. And sometimes kind of mistakes, if we want to talk about this, it was by phone in English with no document at all. And this one, it's quite difficult, in fact, because when you have in a conf call, project status conf call with no document, I like to have documents, to have structured information. And it's not my native language. And I remember during the conf call, there was a Spanish colleague, and at that time, she was not so proficient in English. So she asked in front of everyone, and we have to repeat, to reformulate. And I think, it's not very comfortable for people. So it's important to make people comfortable and to take into account the different needs you can have in terms of communication. So I think that's the biggest mistakes. That's the biggest one I saw, in fact. And second one also, I will link after to the rules, to some tips and advice on how to be effective. The second one also is not taking the time to get to know people. Because, sometimes I'm an engineer. I have to say, I'm quite task-oriented, in fact. And in some cultures, we talk later about the cultures, some people, they are not. And even in the same country, you have people who need building relationship, social relationship, to know personal things. And for me, I remember sometimes I get straight to the point. In fact, what did we do? What did we do? And people, they can feel uncomfortable also by this kind of behavior. For me, it is obvious, but for some people, it is not good. And also they cannot really be effective in their tasks if they haven't built a proper relationship before that. Yeah. So I think that's the two mistakes I saw, Andy.
Yeah. And as far as any other advice, did you have any other advice on if you're leading virtual teams? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of advice, I would like to highlight 3 things. First, ground rules. What is at stake in virtual settings is how to build trust with people you never met. And we didn't have videos, by the way, at that time. We didn't use videos. In fact, nowadays, in where I work, we use a bit more videos, but I have the feeling videos is also cultural. It is used more in some, because, to be transparent with you, when I worked, it was a long time ago, 2003, 2004, I worked with a famous American firm, and they use automatically the video. I remember we had the video, and for me, it was very surprising because it was the first time I saw the video. So it really depends on the ways of working based on cultures and corporate culture also, in fact. So if we get back to advice, ground rules, it's very important to build and to talk about ground rules in your team. What does it mean, ground rules? You can explore constraints. What constraints do your team members have? Technological constraints, bandwidth, camera, perhaps. Organizational constraints, flexible hours, lunchtime, other types of constraints. Do they eat outside at lunch? Do they eat at home? Do they eat at the canteen? It's not the same thing. How long does the eating last? Eating is very important in France and in Europe, in fact. So that's why, in fact. And the last one is also environmental. I would say that flooding, typhoons, earthquakes, and something, Andy, we have to say, we are not really used to electricity shortage. It will link also to cultural aspects, because I work with a lot now of African countries, and some of them, sometimes they told me, wait a minute, I'm going to send an email when the electricity is back. And it's quite normal. It's something I couldn't think of. It's not easy also to find the constraints, because the constraints, people are not aware it's a constraint, in fact, because they are in the field. So that's why all these ground rules, constraints, boundaries also. Boundaries, can I call you during your holidays? Can I call you during the weekend? It's cultural, but it's also personal. It depends how you manage time. What boundaries? Do you have a separation between family and work or not? Do you live in an individual house, or do you live with your parents, your grandparents? It depends also how your life is organized. And this one is more important. Now we use the video because it can be quite intrusive, in fact, with the video. So we have this, we have constraints, we have boundaries, and collaborative tools, last but not least, collaborative tools. And collaborative tools, what is the aim? You have to decide in the team when, what, and usage, when to use a collaborative tool and for what. Collaborative tools, it's not something to must have. For instance, if you want to manage knowledge, because sharing knowledge is very important in a virtual team. If you want to manage knowledge, perhaps you can use an Excel file. Perhaps it is enough. Perhaps you don't need to have a big database, knowledge database. In fact, no one will access, or it is very hard to access, or it is an additional tool to access, in fact. And the team has to discuss, to talk about this, because sometimes top management, they have to push some tools because they want some tools to be used, etc. But perhaps they are not adapted to the purpose of your project and to the tasks of the team also. So it's a kind of thing you need to discuss in the team. So I think ground rules. And then I want to say that preparation is very important. When you work in virtual teams, you need to prepare a bit more the meetings because otherwise it can had the experience lately, very recently of a meeting. And during the meeting, the country asked a lot of questions, really a lot of questions. They could ask me separately, but they asked in front of the provider. Why? Because I didn't take time to prepare with the country to know what they wanted to know, what they missed, what kind of information they needed. So you really need to prepare a bit more. And last point, virtual worker, because also we are all now virtual workers. So just 3 tips as a virtual worker. You have to design well your office, we know. And also, I think we have to accept if you work very well in the kitchen, that's okay. And perhaps you need a budget also to equip yourself. A good screen, a good, I don't know, also a keyboard, good mouse. I don't know, it's something to discuss, this point to discuss with your line managers, because project teams, we don't usually, I don't have budget to equip the team. So it's part of line management. And you have to also don't neglect your health. Of course, you have to move. We all know we have to move to get routines and to eat properly. So if I want to summarize 3 big chapters, here, ground rules. Oh, sorry, I have to rewind. I think we have ground rules, preparations of meetings, and then virtual workers. How can you be a better, efficient virtual worker?
Yeah, I love that, because a lot of us are working virtual, but within the same culture. But just virtual within the same culture has challenges. But you have had to work across some pretty significantly different cultures than what you grew up in. So what are some lessons that you could share to help us be more effective when working with cultures other than our own?
Yes, that's a good question. A great question, Andy, because almost from the first project I worked with a man from Northern Ireland. I didn't have any clue where Northern Ireland was, by the way. Neither the history, the tribals, the hard history, didn't have any clue about this. I was a bit ashamed because it's not very far from France, in fact. So you don't need to go very far not to know, to be, in fact. And after I worked with a lot of Asia, Chinese, and now with Africa. And you're right, what I can retain of all these wonderful experiences, I'd like to highlight 4 points. First, do your homework. What does it mean? It means look for basic facts. You are not going to become a scientist, a researcher on the culture, of course, but just basic facts, the capital, political capital, economic capital, sometimes it's different. The types of languages spoken, national holidays, important festivals, important periods, and by the way, it will help you also in your project calendars. And then you have also, I think what I did to gain a bit more knowledge is also to take intercultural training, because I'm fortunate, we have a lot of training in the firm where I work, and we had intercultural training. And it's a way also to learn. And Andy, when I told people I take intercultural training, they tell me, why? It's stereotypes, this kind of thing. You don't need to have intercultural training. But I think it's completely wrong, because what happens when you had an intercultural training, you can know better about your own culture. And also how your own culture is in comparison with other cultures, because intercultural training is based on dimensions. That's why they said they represent culture in dimension, indirect communication or direct communication, individualist or collectivist. You have this kind of different dimension, and you can see where France is and when other countries are. It's only to give you some trends. It's national culture, it's not individual analysis, because as an individual, as a knowledge worker, as a human being on this earth, I think we are intersections of so many different cultures, personal cultures, work cultures, national cultures. So, but taking an intercultural training will help you to have some hints, some trends, and also not to take things personally and to avoid misunderstanding. So you have to first know the facts, a bit of basic facts. That's the first point. The second point is languages. And when I say languages, why? Because local language, just to know the name, or local languages. In Africa, many local languages, incredible. In fact, you have corporate language also. English is a communication language. So for you, Andy, it's obvious that the corporate language, we have a lot of acronyms, abbreviations. But for me, I had to learn a lot of acronyms and abbreviation ASAP as soon as possible. Something very obvious for people, but not necessarily for everyone. And the last point is Globish, global English, which is simplified English. What does it mean? English is a business language, once more, communication, whether you like it or not. And it's not, if you can perhaps, as a native speaker, American, British, you love perhaps idioms, expressions, jokes. It's very good, but it's the best way to get people lost, people who are not native. And also it depends if you speak too quickly. I worked a lot with British colleagues and some of them spoke very quickly. And sometimes it was a good exercise, intellectual exercise. So when there is no issue on the project, very good. But when there is an issue on the project, it's an additional issue if people speak very, very quickly. And also in a certain point, sometimes we had the feelings, because we talk with different colleagues here in France, that it was a way to be superior, Andy, because, when there is a conflict, it was sometimes perceived like this, because we said, okay, he doesn't make any effort to speak a bit, to articulate a bit more. In fact, I know it's very complicated. I speak very quickly in French, to be honest with you. So French sometimes is also sometimes a business language in Africa. And when I spoke French, I can see the advantage of using your mother tongue as a native language. And I have also to speak too slowly, in fact. So it's not easy, but it's the price to pay when you work in global settings. Two last things: adapt your communication and hold on. Adapt your communication. We already talked about intercultural training. That's a way to adapt your communication. For instance, I worked with a British colleague, and he was responsible for a testing a service in the card, in the SIM card. And you had to test with a local contact, local colleague in Africa. And he said, let's call it Brian. Brian said, the process is to agree to do everything by email. So he sent an email and said, when are you available? He didn't get any answer. Not because the African colleague didn't want to work, didn't want to answer, but sometimes the contacts we have different roles. Whereas in the group, in the headquarters, we have someone for marketing, someone for technical, and then the local contact in Africa received so many emails the whole day from France, from different countries, etc. So the request of Brian was completely lost in the sea of emails. So I told him, I said, yes, perhaps it's better if you send an instant messaging, because it's easier, and they use a lot instant message back and forth to be reactive. And then he said, no, the process is email. But to be honest with you, I sent an instant message to facilitate to find an hour. So, it's what we tell about adjusting your communication tool. And last point, hold on. Where are you from? That's a question I was asked. I was born in France from North African parents, and I'm asked this question, or how long have you been living in France? Yes, okay. This kind of question, sometimes people think it's very cultural aware, but it's not really. And is it a question to ask when you begin to work with someone? I think it's better to wait a bit when you build a trusting relationship, when you know a bit the person, to ask these kind of questions. And 2 days ago, exactly, I work with a provider, and the guy one of the colleagues there, lives and works in South Africa, but he is from Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, a very big country, by the way. And he can speak 4 languages. I was very surprised that you can speak 4 languages. He said, yes, because I lived in 2 regions, and my parents are from the 3rd region. Impressive, I said. And he's going to work with colleagues from DRC in the firm where I work. So I said, it's easy for you. You are all from DRC. Then what language do you use when you speak together? And he told me, we use French, because French is a business communication. And I said, yes, but you don't ask the colleagues, where are you from? From what region in Congo? He said, no, I wait a bit. We have first to build the relationship. And, we had some conflicts also. Yes, I said, yes. So that's why I think, to summarize, do your homework, get familiar with languages, adjust your communication, and hold on.
That's so good, Yasmina. I love your advice that even though you always interact with a person, not a culture, right? It has to be personalized. There are these tendencies that can be helpful to know. I know somebody very well. He's in Turkey, and he was there with a colleague, and they were, I think it was a restaurant, and they were paying their bill. And the person at the restaurant said, "How much do you weigh?" and the guy who was with my friend, he goes, "I don't think that's an appropriate question. No, how much do you weigh?" And he said, he goes, "Well, that makes sense. You're from America. You're fat." And so he was initially offended, but then what he found out is some cultures are just more direct, right? But if you would say that to somebody else, they would take, "How dare you?" And he said in Turkey, he's been asked, "How much money do you make?" Which you would never ask that to somebody else in other cultures. And so learning those tendencies, it makes it more fun in some ways to learn those.
It takes time, I think, Andy, because what we are talking now, really, as you know, you work also with different cultures, with different organizations. It's not a one-off exercise. It really takes time, efforts, and willingness to build the relationship but as I said once more, it's a price to pay if you want to be successful in the global virtual environment where we live in now.
Yeah. I was teaching a project management class virtually with a country in West Africa, French speaking. And I would normally, when I ask a question, I would wait maybe a certain amount of time, and usually people answer, but in this class, they weren't answering. And I was thinking maybe it's because of my accent to them. And so I just let a little bit more time, and people joined in the conversation. But I think, like you said, sometimes we just either speak too quickly or don't leave enough time for someone to answer. And so it's little things like that. Like you said, it's not a one-off. It's we practice, we see what do we need to adjust, but over time it can help us be more effective.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you work in France, by the way, Andy, from my point of view, if you want to work in France, you will be interrupted a lot because we have sometimes the trends to interrupt. We don't really wait for the end of the sentence sometimes.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So not a fair question, so feel free not to ask. But what is it that Americans could do to be more effective with people in France? Can you think of anything? And maybe that could be extended to Europe overall, and maybe even the world. But can you think of anything that Americans have a tendency to do that we would do well to change?
No, it's a great question. First, what I want to say is France, because recently I listened to a short podcast about how to work with French people. And I was very surprised about what was said there, because I think it was not totally true. In the firm where I work, for instance, is very Anglo-Saxon ways of working. What does it mean? It means many people can speak English. Most of people can speak English, and English quite well. They are quite flexible because, perhaps the image you have 2 hours lunch break. It's not really true. They have people, they have 30 minutes. Other people, they have conf calls at 6 o'clock working with America. So the Bay Area, for instance. So there are flexibilities, there are many things, and we use a lot of English words. Also, that's why I say corporate culture, for instance, we use the word meeting, conf calls, this kind of word. So I think the thing is probably how Americans are perceived is to be quite direct, straightforward, to the point. We have more, perhaps at the beginning, some small talks. Sometimes we are a bit late also at the meeting. I think you are very punctual really when you arrive, and you have to admit also a sort delay to the meeting. It's sometimes 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes. So people arrive sometimes quietly and they apologize, but sometimes it's not sharp and straight, in fact. So I think that this kind of thing, small talk, in fact, but I think it's to be very direct. That That's the thing. I worked the first project, one of the first projects, I worked with Americans, and I was sometimes a bit surprised because there were two of them from the Bay Area, very nice guys, by the way. And at the time, there was a entrance hall, and the room, the lab was quite far from the entrance hall. It was a big campus there, and they arrived separately, and I had to pick them up every time, And then I told them, I said, yes, perhaps you can wait for each other, so that I go once to pick you up, and after that was fine. So let's get back, to the fact, explain just the rules, be explicit in your communication. For me, it was abuse, that people will wait at the entrance to come. But for them, they arrive and directly, probably they were in a hurry to come to the lab to work, of course. But that's the kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Beyond virtual and culture, you've been managing projects for some years now, and you've learned a lot of lessons that you weren't taught in a book, right? So what are some things you know now about leading and delivering projects that you didn't know when you first started?
Another great question, Andy. I'd like to highlight 2 points. First, initiating phase. The software project I mentioned at the beginning, that was my first important project. I was in a hurry to get things done. So you remember, I'm quite task-oriented, as I told you. I adapt a lot when I work with Africa, by the way, it's kind of thing, the balance, I change this balance. But sometimes under stress, it gets back to task-oriented. And for this software project, that's a first project, very important. So I was quite task-oriented, I get things done. So I didn't take time to really talk to the sponsor of the project. And I had a first meeting with the developers. I don't have a developer background, by the way. And all the guys, they began to ask many relevant questions. Why do we make this project? When must this project be launched? In what devices will the software be integrated? And I couldn't answer any of their questions, So I had to organize an emergency meeting with the sponsor to get the answers for the team and also for myself. And I told you also lately for the project I made with an African countries a few months ago, that was the same when I said we had the first virtual meeting with the provider and the team asked so many questions because I didn't take time to really talk to them beforehand, because I said we are already very late. The project was quite late to start, but they wanted to launch very quickly, very common things. And also, to be honest, there was some turnover in the team. So I already explained twice, but that's also when you work in with global teams, you can have much turnover. So you have to be ready to be passionate also, to explain every time, to reformulate and to let people have time to onboard on the project and to explain their needs. And that leads to my second point. I think now I have improved a lot, but at the beginning of my career, I kept the nose to the greenstone. I was really focused. You have to go, have to be concentrated, etc. So I didn't take time to really talk to people, to get to know people. For some people, that's not a problem. Like me, perhaps, it works very well. And for others, they really need to get to know you before working properly with you. So that's my 2 things I'd like to share here.
It's a good reminder of how important the people side is, and that's actually why we named the podcast The People and Projects, like exactly. People before the projects, because it's so critical. And from a career perspective, I love how you explained your career and some of the decisions you've made along the way. Anything else come to mind of things you've done or happened to you that helped you attain your current level of success?
Yes, I think first, as I told you, I didn't have any specific guidance, but I didn't ask neither, because it's easy to blame others, but I didn't have any idea that I can ask people, etc. So what is very important for me was the willingness always to improve, despite all the negative feedback along the way, because I got quite negative feedback. I remember I had once a manager, and when we had the first meeting, and I always remember this, I was in his office, we had separated office at that time with a door, and he told me, well, people told me it's very hard to work with you. And it was the first time I heard this. No one told me before. And I was very surprised. And I say, but who said that? Because I needed to have, to know in what circumstances, etc. But he didn't want really to say. And, I think looking back, I understand now why, because as I told you, I was very silent. I think the way of behaving was not really conforming to what you expect of people in the workplace, smiling, how are you, hello, etc. But I think also for me, it's what we call diversity and inclusion. We have to accept all types of personalities and people. So I think this one, the willingness to improve despite this kind of feedback, I said, okay, and I took it personally. I think it was true in a certain way, but it depends how it is said to you and by whom. And unfortunately, when you receive this kind of feedback, that was true. When I said, I didn't listen to it really. And I said, I'll move forward. I go move forward. And what happened is only in 2011, so not such a long time ago, I could take part in an external performance assessment. It was very good, paid by the firm, because I work with a work counselor, very nice. And I had a 360 feedback. And also she helped me to improve, to formulate better my strengths and weaknesses. And this one was really eye-changing, because I understand the way I communicated was not very good. For me, I didn't do anything wrong, but it was very bad received by people. So this point really was a turning point for me.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that story. I was teaching a project management class yesterday, and every participant was a woman. And in most of our classes, it's 2/3 to almost 3/4 women. So we're continuing to see women enter into project management, which is fantastic. I'm interested, what challenges have you encountered as a woman in project management, and any advice that you would share with women who are listening to us?
Yes, you're right. They are not. You have all to remember, and only you remember perfectly. I am in a technical field, engineer, project management, and anyway, even during the studies, there were not many women. I remember we have here in France, competitive classes to get into the university. And there were 40 students at that time, and we were 10 women, in fact. And after engineering school, we were not many women neither. So I was used to being in male-dominated environments. And for me, I never really questioned that. I thought, okay, that's a current situation, that's science. And when I began to work also, I didn't really question that fact. And I'm very lucky because I work in a firm that is recognized to pay attention to equality, I don't know, yes, equality between men and women, in fact. So I said, there is no problem. Until one day, just at the beginning at work, 2 or 3 years, I remember I contributed to projects. And then there was a new project manager who came and he was introducing to me, and they said, here is a new guy who is going to be the project manager. And I was very surprised because I was a bit longer already, because he came out of blue. And I thought, just inside my head, I didn't express it. Why he is a project manager? Why no one proposed to me to become a project manager? But as always, I was silent, So I think it's not challenges, but I have to think sometimes men have informal, male-dominated environment. Men have informal network to push, to promote, to get information. Because that's like in all domains, you need to have the information to know how to progress, how to change the path, how to move forward. It's very important. So that's my feeling. So it's not a big drama, because I tell you, I work with very nice colleagues. But I think I remember I talked to another woman researcher, and she told me, for me, I didn't notice that women were underrepresentation, and women's underrepresentation was a problem. But if I had known it, I would not have taken things personally. And that's true. Sometimes I felt very hurt by, but it's just the way, I think it's going better, but it's still very, very slow. And that's why I think what is important to try to improve this situation, and it's an advice to women, and for some of them, but also message to men. First, for women, be part of women's communities, if you can. what does it bring? You can meet other women. You can network. If it's a women community inside the firm, you can network. You can find role models and perhaps people you can ask questions. Second point, as a woman, be ready to help, to mentor, and to sponsor, especially if you are a top manager woman. Because, also, if you are a top manager woman, you never explain to other women how to get there. You never give your testimony. Or if people reach out to you, you don't mentor anyone. I don't have time. I have too many things to do. Well, how can we progress, I think? And this message is also for men, I think. Men, you see, I became project manager partly because of the sponsorship of my line male manager. And I think it can help a lot, sponsorship also. And the last point is take care of words that are used to describe your performance. For instance, for me, we tell very well organized, very good communicator, not strategic. No strategic. Yes, okay, but how can I become strategic? And talking to other women, they always get a lot of things like that. Excellent, very good communication, very well organized, very good project manager. But when promotions come, well, you're not very strategic. You need to have the big picture, etc. There's a funny thing. I work with a technical expert, and we work together. From my point of view, he was a bit reluctant to share information first. And second point, when he talked, to be honest with you, Andy, I didn't understand any word. It was in French, by the way. It was probably too strategic for me because the sentences were very long and I had to reformulate every time to know what exactly he wanted to say. It was a hidden meaning behind, was not very clear. But from the top management perspective, he was very good at sharing information, also at being strategic. So I think that my free advice here, be part of women's community, be ready to help, mentor, sponsor, and take care of the words used to describe your performance, and also the word you can use as a woman also to describe other women's performance.
That's so good. And like you said, much of that applies to men as well, but especially that's very good. And I think another part of your theme has been your just continual learning. Like when I was seeing your LinkedIn profile, yet another certificate. Like you are a voracious appetite for learning. So what are some specific things you personally do, Yasmina, to continually develop yourself?
It may, we use the same expression in French, by the way, appétit vorace, exactly the same to describe this. Well, you are right, in fact. And from the beginning, I use training. Always began by corporate training. I'm lucky because we have a lot of corporate training, and I think we have to make the most of it. So I am in corporate training. That was the first thing I began with. And nowadays, in terms of training, how to gain knowledge, we are very, very lucky because we have so many possibilities. We have MOOCs. In fact, I use Coursera to give an example to learn how to write better business English. Very good. We have also podcasts like your wonderful podcast and the People and Project podcast. We have webinars. So you have so many things. You can get lost also. That's a bit the risk of this time of too many training. So I think it's important to be very intentional and deliberate when you choose training, because otherwise you are going to enroll in different things and never end the course, in fact. So that's a big risk, I think. Another thing I've begun to use now is they're asking people for advice. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. And when I see certificate, as you say, when I see book, I reach out to people. Was it interesting? What is the risk here? The risk is you don't get any answer. So what?
Right.
And before I didn't dare to do it. I said, no, too important, someone important, the person is not going to answer me. Well, you sent a message. And to be honest, I got many answers, in fact. And that's also a way to learn, to talk to people. And something I didn't do, at the beginning of my career is to ask for advice. how to the career path. It's very important. The other point also is volunteering. That's the way I do it now. I love volunteering, discovered only in 2018. So I'm a baby in volunteering, in fact, but it's great because you can work with people from different ages, countries, nationalities, academic background. It's very diverse, and you can really improve your leadership skills. Very useful when you are a project manager. And last point, being part of a community, being part of communities. You have a community on the Lead 52, in fact, where you send leadership advice. There are different communities. Projectmanagement.com at PMI is a community. So be part, be active, read, connect to people. And I'm part on another community also. It's more with different people, coaches. It's important also to be part of communities with people you don't really interact with. It can give you other perspective. After, as I said, just some examples, you have to make a plan, a strategy. Otherwise, you are not going to learn anything being a bit everywhere.
So much good advice. Like, I think if I had to relive my career over, I would ask for help more often, ask questions of people. I would approach people, just like you said, like sometimes we're afraid to do that. I think if I had to relive my career over, I would do that earlier in my career. This is kind of an odd question, but if you could relive your career over, or at least thus far, what would you do differently?
Like you said, the first thing, Andy, is to talk to people. Mm-hmm. You know, networking for me was a scary word. Yeah. Because behind networking, I saw business opportunities. I don't have anything to offer. So what I do? Or I say, important person, well, not worth talking to this person because this person, I have nothing to offer to this person. And because of these narratives, it stopped me from reaching out. I have a very good example about this in terms of networking. I have improved a bit. I hope I have improved because I said a lot during this conversation with you, Andy. I have improved. So I hope it will be the conclusion of people who know me, in fact. But it was last week, we had a meeting. And in fact, at the beginning of the meeting, I was in advance and there was another guy there. I don't know this guy at all. Before the former mindset, I would say, hello, silence. But now he said, hello, what are you doing? What are you? And the guy began to explain to me, he organizes conferences about innovations. It lasts just 1 hour per week to invite different people. It is virtual. And I said, yes, that's very interesting what you are telling me. And then he said, I can invite you. He can invite you if you want. I said, yes, why not? The last step I missed is, fortunately, the guy was very reliable. He sent me right away the invitation. But the next step, of course, is to write it, to say thank you, and to chase if you don't get the invitation. But I got the invitation, and it's the thing of beyond your task, your title, the activities to open your mind, open your eyes to learn, basically, from people. So this is one point, to ask more people, and probably I would have worked abroad. Probably, Andy. At a certain point, I made an interview to work in a position in London. But at the time, I was a bit afraid. I said, I'm not sure I will be successful in this position. That's a big role. So I refused it, in fact. But I regret it from time to time.
No, I like that. That's good. That's great advice. Just to get to know you more beyond work, what are some of the things you enjoy or priorities for you outside of work?
Outside of work, currently, I have the languages, as you mentioned, because languages, basically, some languages I don't take class. I take classes in Japanese and in Arabic, both difficult languages, and it's quite, and we have also homework. So it takes time, it takes courage also, but it's very enjoyable. And it's another way to meet new people, by the way, people who are not at all in the way I work. There are not so many engineers. In Japanese, there are some engineers. In Arabic, no. Arabic, we are more social scientists, etc. People I don't usually work with. So it's a new way to meet. And I also have a podcast, not as famous as yours, very small. I'm a beginner on this. And it's a way also to experiment with new things, to meet new people, in fact.
Yeah. No, I agree. My favorite thing of the podcast is meeting new people, right? Just like you and I.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, Andy.
So you've shared so much wisdom here. Let's say someone wanted to contact you. Maybe they have a follow-up question or they just want to connect with you. What would be the best way?
With pleasure. LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile. I'm very active in LinkedIn, and I have also a website. And I let you spell everything because alphabet in English, not 100% sure of the letters, in fact.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. I've so enjoyed this conversation, Yasmina. In the show notes for those listening, I put links to Yasmina's LinkedIn profile, as well as her blog on projectmanagement.com. Make sure to check that out. Yasmina, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you very much, Andy. It was a pleasure to meet you today.